Welcome to the world of Colossal, a 5 games for Doomsday actual play podcast of a game by Nich Angell and played by Ben Maddox. So I'm very happy to have the designer of Colossal here, Nich Angell, to talk about himself and the game. So Nick, thank you very much for giving over your time.
Oh, no problem at all. My absolute pleasure.
So my first question to you is sort of, who are you? What's your sort of history with gaming, and also, you know, your history with art and all of that sort of stuff?
Okay, yeah. Well, weirdly, I started out more in comics than games specifically. Like, I studied as an illustrator, and while I was studying illustration, I realized I'd always read and loved comics, you know, from as young as reading as a kid, reading like the Beano and Asterix and Tintin, all that kind of stuff, to just moving on to like superheroes and all sorts of graphic novels and stuff as I got older. And I realized that was actually the direction I wanted my artwork to go in, was this more sort of key-liney kind of illustrative world-building-y sort of style. And so for the longest time, that's what I did. Since probably about 2011, I have been making graphic novels, and I've been on the UK convention circuit, and I've been selling my books all over the country and from my websites and everything. And that was what I thought was going to be me. And it still is. It still is a major part of me and who I am and what I want to do. But I started getting much. I've always been into like gaming. I've always been into board games and video games when I was younger as well. And then I started really seriously getting into D&D, because it was always something I wanted to play, but I never had a group of friends to play it with. And then only recently, in the last sort of 4 or 5 years, we sort of formed a group with some friends, and we've had this long ongoing game, which has just been so much fun. And that really opened my eyes to the world of RPGs and various other kinds. And then I've played other systems since then. And then after a while, it was this realization that, well, I can illustrate things, and I would like to get into the world of designing games, and knowing that I could illustrate them along with that, I just started down that path as well, sort of in parallel with the comics. And then with Colossal, it really blew up. I did a Kickstarter for it back in, I want to say February 2020, actually. So it was a little while ago now. And it just seemed to be what people like to slice of. And it blew up a little bit. And now this is the bigger part of what I do, Colossal and various other bits of game design. And the comics, they're still there, but they have taken a sort of side seat, I suppose, now. So, yeah.
And so how brutal is the world of being an independent comic artist? Because I'm an actor, and it's, you know, it's little bits of pleasure that punctuate the endless morass of frustration and annoyance. I mean, is it the same as an independent comic artist? I mean, yeah, how brutal is it? Absolutely
the same. Like, brutal is the perfect word. It is tough. It is, like you say, punctuated with small moments of joy and happiness and inspiration, I suppose. But a good 90% of it is either the grind on the work itself, or the bashing your head against the industry, which just really either isn't there or is not especially supportive or receptive to new creators. It is really, really tough. And I was in it for solidly, consistently hard in it for 10 years. And I made very small progresses in there. And that's not to say it's impossible, but it's much more to do with, you know, a waving of a magic wand and an incredible bit of good luck as to whether or not your thing gets propelled in some way and seen by more eyes. I think it struggles for comics specifically that UK doesn't really have a comics industry. I think it likes to think it does, but it doesn't really. And you look at places like the US and Japan and France, and these places support and embrace comics massively. And the result is that the people within it are lifted up as well along with that. And the UK, it's no one's fault. It's just how it is. The UK doesn't really have that same sort of support and embrace for it as these other places do. So yeah, tough, brutal is the word. Yeah.
And so, I mean, what's fascinating is, you know, I was away this weekend and I was with some friends I haven't seen in 10 years, and none of them are gamers, and sort of their attitude towards gaming is kind of slightly patronizing acceptance. Games still amongst most people are considered, something of childhood that you should dispense with when you're an adult. Does Britain have that same attitude towards comics by and large? Is it a very niche sort of thing?
Yeah, I think it might be partly that. Yeah, I think there is a sense of this isn't a grown-up medium for storytelling. And comics, that's the Beano, or comics, that's I guess the Beano is a prime example. I think if you said the Beano to 90% of people in the UK who aren't interested in the world of comics, they'd probably just go, "Oh, what, you mean like Beano?" In fact, I think I've had that exact conversation in a pub toilet once with a guy who was a bit drunk and asked me what I did for a living, and I said I draw comics, and he was like, "Oh, what, like Beano?" And I was like, "No, not at all." And I think that partly as well comes from the fact that it isn't this mass accepted thing. If you see pictures of the underground trains or any trains in Japan, and you'll see businessmen, like hundreds of them in a carriage, and they'll all be reading manga on the way to work. And it's not because they're childish or nerdy or geeky, it's because those are stories and they sit on the same shelves as novels, and they're accepted as a way that stories are told in that country. And that doesn't happen here at all. And so I think you're right. Yeah, I think it is a little bit of that.
And so what was it about D&D then? Is it because you're a storyteller and you saw the sort of the possibilities that D&D presented?
I think it's actually more that world building has always been the sort of starting point for all the comics and stories I ever told. I always started in a place of thinking of a fantastical place and what would make that place different and unique from our world. And then I would spend like hours, if not days, before even penning a story of like drawing world maps and coming up with cultures and currencies and what made one country different from another, and everything about the nature of the world itself. Before I would then, and then in a weird sort of way, I would have so much equipment then that the story would start to form, because I'd be like, oh, well, this country might be in conflict with that one. And so as a result, why would they be at war? And they'd be at war over this. And then, oh, let's get some characters in there that illustrate why that war is taking place. And before you know it, you've kind of got a story. So I would find myself telling stories from a sort of world position to start with. And I think what I realized from seeing like games like D&D, the source books, these beautiful books that you can buy that set you up to play these games, they are kind of guides to worlds. And then the players get to take these guides and take this awesome place that captures their imagination, and they get to tell a story within it. And I was like, I reckon I already have some of the skills for that. I think I can build a world without a doubt. I feel like that's always been one of my strongest suits, and what people would comment on was one of the best things about my comics. So it's like, what if I took that and then learned a bit about game design and combined that in with that? Maybe I could make something people would like to play. So I guess that was it.
So this is a very crude distinction to draw, but when I think of fantasy, I think of two broad categories. I think of Tolkien, and Tolkien creates a verisimilitude within its world that is confined to its world. Although people try to push things on it, it feels like Tolkien, the politics of Tolkien's world is confined to Tolkien's world. And I think about Terry Pratchett, which is very much an analogue for this world, thinly veiled with a sort of fantasy overlay. What's your attitude to creating fantasy? Do you want to talk about the world in which we live today, or do you want to create a self-contained world that is sort of independent of modern day cares?
Yeah, I think the latter. I think what excites me is the idea of escapism rather than, I suppose, satire or based in reality. Because what I'm looking for when I consume content in, as I say, fantasy content, is something that can take me away from all of that stuff. Because I'm a little bit sort of, the state of the world at the moment, particularly in the UK, is maybe not ideal. And anything that can transport my mind away into a fantastical place where we can all be heroes and good is actually good and triumphs over evil and that sort of thing is very exciting to me. And it's funny, really. I sort of, and potentially incorrectly, really, but I sometimes sort of refer to myself as my content, the stuff I make, as good trash, because I'm not trying to make something that tells a grand message or does something powerful. Although I believe in those sorts of stories, and I deeply care for a lot of them, and I think they're great. But that's just not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to make something that is purely entertaining and fun and transportative and escapist that just takes you away, and you kind of don't have to think about the real world for a little bit.
But do you? I mean, the thing is, when people say escapist, I get the feeling when people say escapist, they sort of say not this world. Whereas I personally see that as a bit of a misnomer because, you know, Tolkien is escapist in that sort of broad sense, but the emotions that Tolkien deals with, the grief and the triumph and the sense of grandeur, all of that is very affirming as a human being, right? It's sort of the core of what we are in many ways.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that, definitely. And I think maybe as you say, it's more of the difference of the world, and then the stories within it can definitely be some of the most powerful human and emotional stories after that point. I'm looking to create a place maybe with the stuff that I make that feels really weird and really different and really unusual. And when you look at it for the first time, you're like, wow, I've never seen anything quite exactly like that. But then once you're within that world, I want it to be a story about, the things that affirm what's great about people and stories and humanity and everything. Because really, I think that's what I'm a huge fan of heroes. Like, and that's maybe just my upbringing and with things like superheroes and stuff, but heroes. And it sounds really obvious, it's like, well, of course you like heroes. Everyone likes heroes. And it's like, but I really deeply like them. And I think what I like about them is, like you say, what they evoke and bring out in people and what people can learn from them. And I truly believe that, the more hero stories, well-written hero stories we can consume, maybe the better we'll be as a people, because we're constantly holding up what it is to be a truly good and an awesome person, and more stories that make heroes out of everyday people, and committing almost everyday heroism, then the better, because we're going to create an aspirational quality there, which people will maybe want to. So no, I do take your point. Like, it's funny, really. We want a bit of escapism. I want to go somewhere incredible and fantastical and weird and different. But then when we're there, I want to see stories of the same sort of high caliber quality of person just doing their best to survive and succeed there, kind of thing.
So going on to Colossal then. So Colossal is a niche of a niche. It's something that I've discovered recently, the journaling RPG. What was your experience with journaling RPGs before you came up with the idea of Colossal, or did just the idea come fully formed to your mind?
So the idea was going to be a comic, and I've had the idea for years and years and years before I began work on it as a solo RPG. I had the title, I had the world, everything in my head. I even had some characters and the beginnings of a story, although it was actually quite different then. But some things have still remained consistent with that. But yeah, I honestly thought it was going to be a story, and I have so many of these sorts of ideas, and comics take a lot of time and a lot of grind and a lot of work to make. And so a lot of these ideas just sit in parallel with each other and on the back burner, and nothing really happens. And it saddens me, because there's this weird urge inside me that I want to get these things out. And I can't really articulate why I want them out into the world. I suppose a part of it is like, I want people to read them or see them or be entertained by them, I guess. But it's more, for me, in a funny sort of way, I just really want to get these things out and put them out into the world. And so I really wanted to get Colossal out into the world, because I thought it was a really cool idea. And then I ended up discovering some solo RPGs in the early months of the pandemic and lockdown and everything, because we couldn't play D&D anymore. And I happened to get wind of the fact that these things exist. And I had these few. I picked them up from a gaming convention I went to, and they were like single sheet solo RPGs. They're like super, super simple paired back. And it was just like a paragraph would describe what you're trying to do or whatever. I think one was like a Western style one, and another one was like you were a chef in a sort of fantasy restaurant. I can't remember them as well now as I'd like to. But yeah, and I played a few of them, and a couple of them had this sort of playing card system where you drew a card and then checked it against a sort of prompt table. And I realized that was a really elegant system. And then my brain just started spinning and was like, I want to make one of these. I want to have a go at this. But I needed a setting, and I had Colossal in my head, and I was like, oh, you know what? Actually, that would be really cool, because that's maybe a better setting than it is. I don't have a full story yet. I don't have anything finished, but I have the world in my head very clearly. So if I can combine those two together and maybe adapt a sort of playing card drawing system and add a bit of complexity to it so that there's a little more to it than just, fully just left to your imagination, maybe I could make something out of that. And I did.
So it's fascinating because I'm still a novice in this area, but what I notice about Colossal is it's mechanically more involved than a lot of these journaling RPGs. A lot of journaling RPGs, as you say, leave pretty much everything up to the player apart from the sort of card draw and the prompt. And it feels like a synthesis of something of a D20 game, something like D&D with a journaling RPG. Was that your intention from the beginning?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, in the very early days, as I was sort of putting pen to paper on this, I started to feel like I was actually feeling a little restrained by the sort of simplicity of an average solo RPG system, journaling system, and my primary experience had been D&D, and so I was thinking, how can I get some of that flavor and some of that feeling into a system that you play on your own? And the big thing I kept like sort of searching for was I wanted it to be fun. And that's not just to say fun from the journaling part of it, but the actual playing of the game as well. I wanted there to be an aspect of drawing a card and getting a feeling like you would playing any kind of game that involved pieces, as it were. And I think that's been something that I've always tried to hold in everything I've ever designed games-wise, is this concept of trying to like make every part of the process actually fun. I don't want there to really, really be any sort of grind at any point. And that was why very early on I came up with the idea in Colossal of the fact that you can basically avoid any combat that you want. And I thought that would be a nice way to ensure that people can always kind of play the game the way they want to play it. Maybe they don't want to be a fighter all the time. And certainly if they're close to death, they need to have a way to be able to avoid that fight. I didn't want them to feel like they were constantly dying and constantly butting up against the rules of the game. And so I wanted to create something that was like simultaneously fluid while also having a structure to it as well. And I'd had some experience because the game I worked on before Colossal was a game I worked with my friends at Big Punch Studios. We're a company a small indie games development studio that I've made. And we made a game called Sandwich Masters a long time ago. I think it was 2015 we developed it. And it's a very silly, family-friendly game involving decks of cards that have ingredients in them, and then orders are dealt out onto the table. And you have to make the order with the ingredients in your hand. But the gimmick is that there are evil ingredients which you can use and the customer won't mind. If you can complete the sandwich and sell it, then you get away with it. But health inspectors crop up from time to time. And if you've got something disgusting or evil in your sandwich, then you're in trouble. That was the basic idea of it. And so in designing that and developing that, I learned a lot about card mechanics and a lot about keeping the game fun at every single draw, every single point of the game. That was really important. And I realized that I can add more fun if I not add more complexity, but add a layer of complexity that ensures that there is a feeling of rush and excitement and discovery when you turn over a card. That was the idea.
And you're a graphic novelist, a comic book artist, and a large part of Colossal is writing. Was the writing aspect important to you, and how you trained to be an illustrator? How long did it take you to become a writer too, or did you always have a natural aptitude?
That's a good question. I don't know really. I think I've always written. My comics often start as, calling them a script would be generous, but they start as a somewhat sort of prose-like thing. And I've always had a lot of fun and taken a lot of pleasure in writing. It's often the first stage of coming up with an idea. And that first stage, when the concept is brand new in your head and you're so excited to just roll it over and over again, it's going to bed or whatever, or in the shower or something, those halcyon like honeymoon days at the beginning of an idea are just the best. They're just the best time. And so much of that for me was hallmarked with writing, because I would write my ideas down and I would try and write them in such a way for it to be clear and understood. And if it was rules, then I'd almost be writing it in a way that hopefully if someone read it, they'd understand. And if it was a story, I'd always write it in a way, because quite often I would write things down and then I wouldn't look at them again for months because something else would come up or I'd work on another thing. So I'd have to write things in a way that would mean that on a reading, 6 months to a year later, I still understood it. And so I put a lot of effort into writing clearly and writing hopefully well. And so I guess it was always part of the process, but it was never part of the export, which is weird. But I always gained a lot of pleasure from it. And I think what I gained from playing other solo RPGs was a realization that I get to write, but I don't have to worry about exporting. I don't have to worry about giving it to anyone because it's purely there for the gameplay side of things. So I can just write for me, just purely for me. And I find it very hard these days to do things purely for me. I sort of don't know how to relax anymore because my hobbies have become my work. And so I don't know what I'm supposed to do to have fun. But I found myself having fun playing these games. And I think part of it was the writing of it, because I think it reminded me of those conceptual, because every time you play a chapter of a solo RPG, you're concepting, you're coming up with things, you're thinking, oh, I could combine those two prompts in a weird sort of way, and it's fun, and then you just get to write it there and then. And I think that's what it made me think of, is those early days of concepting.
And so when you came up with the idea and you decided to go to Kickstarter, how surprised were you at the response, and why do you think the game has been as successful as it has?
I was absolutely stunned. I was completely taken aback. I wanted to make a 24-page A5 little zine. That's what I wanted it to be. It was going to be black and white with a color cover. I was going to splash out a bit and have a foiled cover with the text of Colossal written in silver foil. And I thought that would be nice. And Kickstarter was doing this thing, which I can't remember what they call it now. It's called like Zine Quest, I think, where for a month they promote people to run little zine RPG type Kickstarters. And I was like, I'll join in with that. And I had this half-baked concept for Colossal, and I'd done a bit of artwork, and I was like, I'll get it together in time for Zine Quest and I'll launch it for that. And that'll be fun. And I set a goal of £250. That's all I needed to print a good few copies of that. And I thought, I've done a lot of Kickstarters in my time, and they've always just creeped over to their target. I thought this will be no different at all. I'll be happy just to get it out into the world. And then in the first 4 hours, I had something like £5,000 or £6,000, and I was just like, "What is happening?" And I was completely blown away. And then by the end, it just soared stratospherically, far, far beyond anything I could have ever imagined. And as a result, the book transformed into a 60-page A4 hardback, full color throughout. And I was able to add more to it, and it just inspired me to grow it and make it bigger, which was really exciting and just stunning and humbling. And I'm still stunned by it today. But as for like how and why that happened, I don't know, to be totally honest with you. I think a good part of it was Zine Quest happened to start at the start of lockdown, and I didn't think anything of it at the time. But I was making a solo RPG while lockdown just began, so everyone's D&D games had stopped. They couldn't play with their friends, and then suddenly here's a solo game that looks kind of a bit fun. So I was a little bit in the right place at the right time, I think. But there were other solo RPGs around at the same time, and I think some of them did well off the back of that as well. I think something about the world captured people's imaginations. I get so many comments about the cover of the book, which surprises me because I like the cover. I'm happy with the cover, but I didn't think it was that special sort of in any way, but people go on and on about that, which is lovely. And so maybe it was partly that as well. Maybe something about the cover that I drew was capturing people's imaginations. I think it was to some extent a perfect storm. I just maybe did a few things right and in the right proportions to one another, and people responded to it. But I have also noticed that the world of games and making games products is so much a more receptive industry than comics is. Which is interesting, but I think there's a bit of that as well.
And so it's fascinating. When I was talking to people planning my next series, and someone had suggested Colossal to me, and I suggested it to other people. And because I'm a bit of an edgelord, people were sort of like, "Oh, I'm not sure Colossal would work for you. It's a bit sort of whimsical, and you're a goth, and it might not work." And I think people get the opinion of that from the art style. To what degree do you think that people's subsequent plays of Colossal are influenced by that sort of very bright, very whimsical, very sort of positive art style that you've put into the book?
Well, firstly, I'm really glad you say that because that's exactly what I was going for. And for you to say those things is a huge compliment to me. So thank you. But it is really interesting because I really want my art style and the sort of everything you've described about it. I want that to be part of Colossal's DNA. And it is for me. But I've noticed that it isn't always for everyone else. I've read some other people's, there's a lovely Discord server entirely devoted to Colossal. And everyone shares their art and shares their journal entries and everything there. And it's very humbling. I check in every now and then. It's just so exciting to see all these people playing my game. But something that I've noticed is that a lot of people really do just take it in the direction purely that they want to take it in. And they will do a kind of more edgelordy kind of story where they're like a badass, grizzled, scarred, dark kind of hero who goes around cutting down people and is just kind of like your classic dark fantasy hero kind of thing. And in many ways, the artwork of Colossal doesn't, sort of say, promote that idea in any way. But I'm really glad that people are able to still tell the stories they want to tell within the system. I think I would like to think that my style and my artwork is something of a selling point. My art is not the same as every other fantasy art out there. And so I think it gives Colossal an identity. But from what I've learned is that, it's not restrictive in that sense. Like people can also do what they want to do as well, which I'm actually really happy with as well. I've got an idea of what Colossal is, and I will continue to illustrate and promote that idea. But if someone else wants to do it in a completely different way and use the tools that I've created, because at every point I sort of make it possible, like you can meet NPCs in the game, for example. And despite the fact that I don't really promote the idea of just cutting down random people in the game, I do put the stats there for what their life is, because you might want to role play or might need to role play killing someone in the story, and I don't want that to be ruled out either.
Right.
So it's a place in which people can do what they want to do.
And so, my sometime employer, Tabletop Gaming Magazine, voted it, I think, RPG of the Year or something recently, and it's a game it got recommended to me. It's being sort of, it's becoming something of a thing. How gratifying is it to you that the Colossal is developing this reputation? Oh,
incredibly gratifying. Like, it sounds like another obvious thing to say, but like as an artist, you want recognition. You want to know to some extent that you are doing a good job of being an artist, and in an inherently subjective world, that's practically impossible. And there's very few ways we have, metrics, I suppose, to categorize whether or not I'm doing this at all well. And one of those ways is how many sales you get. But that's kind of a bit subjective as well, because you know how much reach you have, and you might be getting the best sales you could get for your reach, but that you might be able to get way, way more, and that's not anything to do with the quality of the work. So that's a really tricky one. And awards or recognition on that sort of scale are really one of the biggest and best ways, despite the fact I don't want to be the kind of person necessarily who chases them, but it's undeniable that they are valuable to artists, I think, for that exact reason, because it's just so hard to quantify and qualify whether or not you're doing a good job or not.
And it puts baked beans on toast on your table, I guess.
Well, this is it. You can't deny that. And I'm at a position where I can now, really, really stunningly be able to say that I'm going to go full time with this. And Colossal has allowed me to essentially leave my day job and make this everything. And with the future of what I have planned for Colossal and also future games as well. So, And yeah, these sorts of recognitions make this possible. And really all I want is the ability to be able to make more stuff like this. I don't want for much more than that. And this allows for that. Incredibly, it's been nominated for 6 Ennies in the Ennie Awards. So I'm actually going to be flying over to the US in a couple of weeks to go to the award ceremony. I don't know whether I'm going to win any, but just being nominated alone has done wonders for it as well, and has massively raised its profile. And I've got this huge spike of orders have come through, which is just astonishing and incredible. So yeah, it's everything. It's made my year.
So on that then, what is the future for Colossal? Because you've had expansions come out. Where are you planning to go with it?
So the biggest sort of ongoing expansion, I suppose you could say, is the Patreon. The plan for the Patreon is that gradually over time, the Patreon will take us to new parts of the Colossal, and these new places will not only have radically different looks and feels and biomes and qualities to them, but they'll also play differently as well. So at the moment, the Patreon is in a part of the Colossal called Kyodina, which is an Eastern-themed sort of part of the Colossal. So the rooks and the rooms themselves all have this kind of Japanese, Chinese feel to them, because castles, obviously, in Japan look very different to castles in Europe. And I had this realization fairly early on that there are castles all over the world, but castles all look different depending on different cultures. And I thought maybe there's something there. Maybe there's a way we could use that in the world of Colossal as well, and have these radically different looking places that play slightly differently as well. But also I really want to inject a feeling of discovery and gradual kind of like pioneership, if that's a word, where we are crossing boundaries, and we're discovering and going deeper and deeper into the Colossal and finding other things out there. So there's this constant growth that's happening there, and spinning out of the content I create for the Patreon will be subsequent books, which will be very much sort of pick and choose. They'll be like, if you want to explore Kyodina, then you can, but you don't need to. But potentially the next location that we visit, you could choose that instead. And it just adds different qualities to the games that you play.
When I was doing my research into Colossal to decide whether it would be a series or not, I was reading on the sort of FAQ pages, and there was just one moment that gave me a little bit of pause when it said, you can't sell the work you produce in Colossal for yourself. And then I read down and it said, but basically, streaming or podcast, it's fine. I went, okay, great, phew. Was this because you've experienced people doing that in the past, or is this just a general sort of thing that you'll always put on a project like that just to cover your bases?
It's a bit of both. In the early days of Colossal being out, I got a lot of questions asking this exact thing. And so I figured it would be simpler if I put it on an FAQ, so that if people subsequently want to ask it, they could maybe check that out first. And then the other side of the coin, I think, is this just general sort of idea of looking after what you've created. It's a big learning curve, because something else I've created for Colossal is an OGL, which is an open gaming license, which is something that a lot of RPGs have, particularly something like D&D. And in many cases, it's called the big thing that saved D&D and made D&D as popular as it is today, is this ability for people to create content for it. And in the early days, it seemed like complete anathema when trying to protect your own IP to allow people to make stuff with your IP. But the more I thought about it, the more it made total sense. And as long as I could create an OGL that would protect, my creation, then I didn't think, if anything, it would benefit it. And of course it has. Overall, people have been creating additional content for it, and it's been brilliant. And I really love the stuff that people have made for it. And I think, if more than anything, it's helping in every way, the community, the game itself, and everything.
Well, I think what's fascinating about that is if people get exposed to this additional content people have created, they always have to come back for the core book, right?
Yes.
So it's beneficial, right?
Yeah. Exactly. And I think that's the key part of what you have to create when you're creating an OGL, is ensuring that it's open for people to mess around with and play and add their own content too, but doesn't subsequently allow people to completely bypass you. And it's a scary thing having an IP that is popular, because I've had IPs before in all my comic stories and stuff, and I've always protected them as well as I felt I needed to, but it's never gone to this level before. And it's quite scary in the early days of thinking, so many people's eyes are on this thing now. What if someone steals it? What if a big scary company manages to download the digital file and just decide to print and sell it themselves? And they could. It's a scary thing, and unless you protect yourself and you have things like trademarks and copyright and licensing and stuff all in place, then you can get taken advantage of, and you hear horror stories about it. And for the first time ever, I felt like I was sat on something that had done a little bit of success, and I wanted to do what I could to protect it. And yeah, well, the future will decide whether or not I've been too zealous, overprotective, as it were, or just the right amount. I don't know, but I'm learning, and I'm willing to keep adapting as I go. So
just to wrap up, then, now people who are listening to this have more than likely listened to, I'm just behind the curtain when we record this, I'm nowhere near finishing my playthrough, so they might have listened to 10, 12 episodes of Colossal, and I'm sure they'll have an idea of whether or not it's for them or not, but, you're the creator, you're the designer. Why should people pick up Colossal if they're curious?
I would say that you should pick up Colossal if you want an opportunity to be transported to a world that is exciting and different, but also yours. It's an opportunity for me to take you somewhere and then you to take it further. What I wanted for Colossal was this environment where I introduced you to really cool, weird, new stuff that was hopefully illustrated in an engaging and exciting way and inspires you and your imagination to then go, oh, if I was here, I would do this. What I've always wanted is I've wanted that. I've wanted to be handed a world that was so inspirational to me that I could play in it. And I think to some extent I've managed to do that for some people. And if you are the kind of person that would like to be given a fantastical fantasy playground in which you can tell your own story of your legendary hero's exploration through this bizarre world that to some extent you can make your own, then I would say Colossal is for you.
Brilliant. Well, Nich Angell, thank you very much for your time and thank you for creating the game.
Well, no problem at all. My absolute pleasure.